So first off, I'd like to thank our sponsor, Straddling, for sponsoring the Lunch and Learn series and for their continued support of UCI Applied Innovation. Today's speaker is Kevin Krusiewicz. Kevin has over 12 years of experience working with startups and tech companies. He's the founder of Tell and Train, where he helps clients clarify their message and explain their products and services in simple terms to ultimately convert more of their prospects into paying customers. He is here today to speak about using the power of story to create radically clear marketing. Welcome, Kevin.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. How are we doing? Get some pizza? Well, we are here today to talk about the power of story and how story can help us create radically clear marketing. And quick show of hands, how many business owners or startup owners in the room? Okay, good mix. How about investors? Investors in the room? What about just not startup owners, but business owners? Maybe you've been running your business for a long time. Long-time business owners. Great. I'm in the right room. You're in the right room. Startups and business owners of all sorts waste a ton of money on ineffective marketing while searching for product market fit. And yet, product is often not the problem. Many times, our prospects are confused by our messaging. They don't understand how we're going to help them quickly enough. So we miss out on opportunities. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about brain science and why that's the case. We're going to talk about how we tune out messages that don't connect to our need to survive or thrive quickly enough. And we also tune out messages that make it too hard to understand that value. Too much cognitive load. And we're going to talk about story and how stories solve this problem because it's a sense-making device. And stories basically organize a lot of information into an understandable format. So we want to be able to recruit story to help us tell our story. And who doesn't like a good story? We're going to be talking a lot about movies. How many movie buffs in here? How about novel readers? Okay, so we're going to be talking about a lot of the commonalities between movies and novels. But mapping your company's story to the 7 key story ingredients is critical to explaining your product and service in simple terms so that you can convert more of your prospects into paying customers. And we all want that. So let me just ask a question. What do we want? As business owners and as investors, big picture, what are some of the things we want? I have some ideas, and I'm going to put this out there, and I'd love a little bit of feedback if I'm on the right track. I think that owners want to grow their business, and they want to, at some point, have a profitable exit. Is that a fair statement? We want to grow our business. We want to have a profitable exit. Investors want to be able to invest with confidence and want to make sure that they can get their ROI with some speed, some efficiency. We don't want a 10-year window, in other words. Is that a fair statement for the investors in the room? Okay, great. But maybe you're in sales, and you just want to have a great quarter. Anybody just working as a sales guy, selling something, and want to have a great quarter and go on a great vacation with your family? What about if you're part of a nonprofit? Any nonprofits here today? Saw a couple earlier. And maybe you just need to drive more donations this year so that you can further your mission. These outcomes, whatever line of business we're in story terms, represent our happy endings. Okay? Remember this movie? Happy ending here. In order to get our happy ending, we really need to convince a lot of people to buy our product or service, and we need to grow the value of the company to the point where somebody's going to want to buy it. Fair? But there's a problem. The problem is, depending on who you ask, 75 to 90% of startups fail. Not a happy ending. We have another problem. The people who are supposed to buy our stuff, our target audience, or donate to our cause, so that we can all have this happy ending, have limitless choices these days, right? And are just being overwhelmed with messages about other products or services or causes just like ours, to the tune of about 10,000 brand messages per day. So this is what we're inundated with, and this is what our prospects are inundated with. So because of the volume, just the sheer volume of marketing messages, whether it's through social media, email marketing, traditional media, the people who should be buying from us are actually prone to tune us out. How many of you have experienced this to some degree? You have a message, but nobody's really listening for one reason or another. It's tough. But this kind of makes sense, right? I mean, we understand what it means to tune something out. If something doesn't immediately connect to a felt need, it doesn't feel relevant, and we just tune it out. Have you ever noticed that you don't really notice that particular car on the road until you're in the market for cars, and all of a sudden they're everywhere? So this is just the brain's filtering mechanism. It's a coping mechanism so that it doesn't get overwhelmed. So can we just pause for a moment and just acknowledge that this is kind of frustrating? We have something really cool, something that can really help people, but we're challenged to get our message out there in a way that people find compelling. This is frustrating. So even with a great product, a great service that really can help people and do good in the world, it's hard to sell our stuff. We have another problem. The guys with the most muscle tend to win, whether it's the Amazons of the world or the Walmarts or whatever sector you're in. The big guys with the most capital and the most muscle tend to win. And so for us little guys, it's really difficult to make it. Who knows what movies this is? Karate Kid. I'm so glad, because we're going to be talking about this movie a lot. Nobody really likes a bully, right? So Daniel, we're going to talk about Daniel, and he gets his butt kicked throughout the duration of most of the movie of Karate Kid. And we really don't like Johnny and the bully. And so there's kind of this evil in the world that we want to overcome. And when bullies take advantage of weak people, it's just not right. So we have that going for us. So let's talk about tuning out for a second. Let's go back to this idea. The human brain really has two primary goals at all times. Whether you're aware of this or not, this is happening under the surface in your brain and my brain and our prospects' brains constantly. The first thing the human brain wants to do is to survive and thrive. And you might remember Maslow and his work with his hierarchy of needs. At the bottom, we have physiological needs, right? And then we move up to safety and love and belonging, and then self-esteem and self-actualization. So, in Irvine, we're not necessarily thinking about day-to-day survival. We're doing okay. We all look pretty well fed. But as those needs are taken care of, we begin to look for ways to thrive. And we, as consumers, purchase products and services that help us survive and thrive, whatever the definition of that is for us. The second thing that our brain's constantly trying to do, because it wants to survive and thrive, is conserve calories. It wants to reduce cognitive load. So when we stumble upon a website that looks like this, our brains freak out as we try to take it all in and organize and understand. I'm sorry if this is your company. I just thought it was a good example. We're trying to pull it in and understand it all. And it's hard to do that. What does this company do? Anybody know? Was that? Confuse people? Okay. For money. What do they do for money? I don't know. We might, try to dissect this for a few minutes and figure that out. But that's a problem if you want to compel people to buy your stuff. What about this company? What do they do? Any guesses? What do you think? Hard to say. There's not really a message at all. The first one maybe was over-messaged. This one's certainly under-messaged. Visitors are going to bounce if they don't think our product or service will help them survive and thrive quickly enough. And that's sort of the grid and the lens that we need to look at our marketing through. We only have a few seconds, a few short seconds. It's actually about 5 seconds. When somebody lands on your website, you have about 5 seconds for them to be able to answer 3 questions above the fold. In other words, without scrolling down. 5 seconds, 3 questions. What do you do? How can you help me? And how can I get it? 5 seconds. What do you do? How can it help me survive and thrive? How can I get it? If you can't do that, they're gone. They bounce. You've lost them. Bummer. When we pitch to investors, startup founders, or we're asked about what we do at a cocktail party or at a function like this, and we launch into this long, complicated explanation about how our uncle started the company, and wow, it's kind of complicated to explain, and we're not really sure how to explain it. if you get this face when asked the question, what do you do? This is a problem. And you have a few seconds to try to get yourself out of that situation. We really need to have a prepared message. If we as startups or as investors and nonprofits are going to get that happy ending, okay? We need to connect with our target audience's need to survive and thrive, and we have to do it quickly without too much cognitive load. We have to stop the brain hurt. If you're making your clients and your prospects' brains hurt, you're losing opportunities and you're leaving money on the table. Or as Donald Miller is fond of saying, if you confuse, you lose. So how do we do that? How do we do that? Well, that's why we're here. Another great story. Anybody know it? Princess Bride, thank you. How do we do this? We do this through the power of story. Using the basic ingredients of story, we can really quickly connect with our audience's desire to thrive and survive, and we can do it in a way that's easy for them to understand. But in order to do that, we have to understand the parts of story. We need to understand the mechanism. We need to understand how stories work. Okay? So all stories have things like beginnings, middles, and ends, right? Act 1, Act 2, Act 3. All stories have heroes and villains and conflict. Now, stories are not the same thing as, the nightly news necessarily, or journalism, or history, even if a story or a movie is based on real events or true events. No, stories purposefully leave out information that's not critical to the objective of the person writing that story, whatever that desired outcome is. So all the details aren't necessarily there. Dumb and Dumber, great movie. Probably not a great example of this, but I like it anyway. What if Harry and Lloyd, in addition to wanting to return the briefcase of money to a pretty girl, also wanted to open a law practice and volunteer for a nonprofit and take up curling? That might be interesting or entertaining, but from a story perspective, it just doesn't further the story. It doesn't help us get interested in what happens throughout the rest of the story. Ultimately, a story is about transformation of a hero from somebody who's weak or insecure or angry or thwarted or deeply lost to somebody who is empowered and confident and sure of themselves, resolved, centered, strong. These are the stories that we love. And all of the stories that we've talked about thus far, all of our favorite stories, they actually follow predictable patterns. And if we learn these patterns, we can recruit them to help us get our happy ending. We're going to talk about the Karate Kid because I love it. So, the first thing in every story is a hero who wants something, okay? In the beginning of the Karate Kid, we meet Daniel LaRusso, and he's just moved cross-country with his mom. We don't know where the dad is. He's not in the picture. And he's 15 years old. He's kind of skinny, scrawny kid. He's 15, which is why he's got a BMX bike, the bane of all 15-year-olds. And so he's riding to school on his BMX bike and trying to make friends. And so Daniel's our hero. Now, what does Daniel want? You guys remember what Daniel wants? At the beach party, he meets Allie Mills, played by Elizabeth Shue. And she's this cute high school cheerleader. She comes from a wealthy family. They hit it off over soccer. He shows her how to juggle, and everything's looking up. Great. So let's just pause here in a minute in that story and talk about our company's story and how we're telling that story. Do we understand our clients, who are the hero of the story, and what they want? A lot of marketing makes the company selling something into the hero, and the client is the damsel in distress that needs to be rescued. And that's a mistake. I want to posit that that's a mistake. And I'll talk about our role as a company trying to sell something in a little bit. We'll talk more about what our role is. But for the purpose of this exercise, we want to position our client as the hero, because our client wakes up in the morning and they want something. They have an agenda. And it may not be our agenda. They're kind of on their own track. We need to get onto that track. So one of my clients, Sarah Sis, they they have a key customer persona or target audience. And they call her Sally. They have a name for her. And they really want to understand who Sally is because they want to get in her head. They want to understand her buying psychology. Sally Manager is a logistics supply chain or distribution manager. And she works for a wholesale retail trade or a manufacturer. So she's in charge of shipping, and she's got to ship stuff. And what does she want? Defining and understanding what our clients want is super important. She wants greater control, better visibility, and better visibility into her shipping spend. And she wants to easily report shipping information up to her bosses. But it's hard for her to do this. So what do your prospects want, specifically, as it pertains to your product? Really important to answer that question. Well, in addition to a hero who wants something, every story also has a problem. And what's Daniel's problem? Remember his name? Johnny. Johnny from Cobra Kai. Well, I showed my 13-year-old son, 14-year-old son this movie, and he was just getting all triggered because, you know, he's getting that kind of adolescent age, and as Daniel was getting beat up, he just was so triggered and upset about what was happening, and I tried to calm him down, and like, it gets better, it's okay. But Daniel's got this problem, and he's at this beach party, and Daniel's trying to do this thing with Allie Mills, and along comes Johnny, and he kind of gets aggressive with Allie, and they used to date, but Johnny knows karate, and he's just super macho guy, and he ends up destroying Allie's stereo. And Daniel comes in and kind of tries to intervene and rescue. And what happens? He gets beat up, and he gets into this position here with his face in the sand. Okay, so externally, at face value, we have a bully. That's the problem. But internally, what's Daniel feeling right now? Help me out. What's he feeling at this moment? Ashamed, rejected. He's trying to impress a girl, and he gets beat up by her ex-boyfriend. Embarrassed, frustrated, angry. In fact, Allie tries to come over and console him, and he's just like, go away, leave me alone. He just can't face it. So under the surface, there's this deep problem going on, and what we see on the outside is really just an analogy of what's happening on the inside. Not only does Daniel have these problems, the external problem, we have a bully, and he has this internal angst. Now the world has a bully that's unchecked. We don't like bullies, do we? We don't like strong people that take advantage of weak people. Like, this is a problem now not just for Daniel, but for the world. And so immediately in the movie, we dislike Johnny. And it sets the movie off. Will Daniel shrink back and kind of back down, emasculated and defeated? And will the bad guy win the day? Or will he overcome? Will he find the strength and essentially his masculinity to be able to stand up to this bully? And so the movie sets off. And now we're hooked. Now we have to know. Wouldn't it be great if we were telling our corporate story in such a way that our customers just had to keep listening? Usually we have the opposite problem. They get the brain hurt face. But if we can start using these story principles, we can hook our prospects, and they'll actually want to listen to us. They have to know that we understand their problems. They have to know that we empathize with them. We'll talk about empathy quite a bit. So externally, what are our customers' problems? At face value, what problem do you solve? And that's generally pretty easy. We provide a solution for X. That's great. So for Sally, she has a problem, and it's freight and logistics headaches, exceptions, problems with freight and logistics. But internally, we really need to get dialed into what they're feeling. Because these are people, right? I mean, it's easy to talk about these kind of faceless personas or our target audience, which is really vague. But like, what if her name's Sally and she lives next door to you, and she's working on the weekends, and that's really frustrating for her? These are the kinds of actual human problems that our prospects are dealing with. We need to drill down into this. She's feeling anxiety and fear and frustration, pressure. She's feeling overwhelmed. In the corporate chain of command, there's a saying of something rolls downhill. Do you all know that expression? So maybe she's downhill. The other piece that we need to talk about is the philosophical piece. So in The Karate Kid, there's a bully in the world, and who likes that? For her, she feels like it shouldn't be this hard. Why am I paying a logistics company or a shipping company to get my stuff there on time, and it's not there on time? Why am I paying them to get it there undamaged, and it's damaged? She has feelings about that, and there's something that's just not right about it. There's actually a wrong that's begging to be righted. And if we can come in and right that wrong for them, it's a very compelling message. So what are your prospects' external, internal, and philosophical problems? If we can tap into them, we can craft a very compelling message. And if you don't know the answers to those questions, ask them. Talk to your customers. Talk to your best customers. Understand what they were going through. The last piece is the villain. And you need to be careful with this piece in marketing. We don't want to villainize the competition. That will backfire. I can almost guarantee it. But there are villains in our customers' stories. In Karate Kid, of course, we've got Johnny, and then Johnny's sensei that we later find out is just a total jerk, and probably more of the villain than Johnny himself. But can our prospects' problems be personified into a villain? So we've talked about brain hurt. Brain hurt is kind of a personification of a problem. Here's the deal with villains in stories. We love to kill villains. In fact, we must, if we don't kill a villain by the end of the story, don't we walk out of the movie sort of frustrated? And not only do we need to kill the villain or defeat the villain, it needs to be a spectacular death. A helicopter has to fall off a cliff and land on his face, right? Who likes that moment in the movie where the helicopter lands on the villain's face? Don't lie to me, tell me. We all love that because when there's something wrong, begging to be righted, that's satisfying for us. It's that internal moral compass. That's powerful. If we can tap into that in our marketing, very powerful. So where do we fit in? We're not the hero. Clearly, we're not the villain. Where do we come into all of this? So in stories, heroes can't solve their problems on their own. Otherwise, they would have solved them by now. So storytellers have been bringing in another character in stories for a long time, and that is the mentor or the guide. The mentor or the guide. So we've got Yoda to Luke Skywalker, right? And we've got Mickey to Rocky. Love that movie. Any Rocky lovers in here? Like the first Rocky? Love it. And we've got Haymitch to Katniss. And the role of the guide or the mentor is not to be the hero. It's to come alongside the hero to help the hero get what they want. The story's about the hero. It's not really about the mentor. So a lot of brands make the mistake of playing the hero. And here's the problem with that. When your prospects wake up in the morning, they're thinking about their agenda. They're not into your agenda. They're not doing all that they do every day, all day, to further your agenda. They have their own family and their own goals. They're in their own story. They're not a bit part in your story. They're the main character in their own story. And so if you want to be a part of that story, you've got to fit into their story. In The Karate Kid, who's Daniel's guide? That's right. Love this guy. Daniel finds solace in Mr. Miyagi, and he's this Okinawan immigrant. He's kind and generous, a little bit eccentric, and he comes alongside Daniel in his problem. Daniel has a problem. He's being bullied. He's being beat up, and he helps Daniel in two ways that we can learn from. The first is he takes pity on him. He takes pity on him. So you can see like a raspberry above his right eyebrow, Daniel's eyebrow. He's just fallen down an embankment. He was pushed off of this trail. Johnny and his motorcycle gang nudged him off the trail, and they're laughing, and they zip off on their motorcycles. And Daniel falls down this embankment, gets pretty injured, or more of his pride is injured. Yet again, this is happening. His bike gets destroyed. He's kind of in this emotional state. He's really frustrated. He takes his bike, and he goes into his apartment complex in the parking lot, and there's a dumpster, and he dumps his bike, and it's destroyed. And at the same moment, his mom's pulling up. and they begin to have an argument. Daniel's super emotional. She's trying to figure out what's going on and console him, and he's inconsolable. He's inconsolable. And they kind of go their separate ways, and Daniel just keeps saying, I want to go home. I'm tired of this place. I want to get out of here. Could we just go home? Well, Miyagi overhears this, and he kind of peeks his head around the corner, having overheard it, and the next morning, he's fixed Daniel's bike and places it in a conspicuous place where Daniel will find it, but he doesn't ask for any thanks. He doesn't even tell Daniel about it. He's just in his little workshop here doing his bonsai trees. And Daniel seeks him out, and he says, did you fix my bike? Aye. Right? He fixes his bike. Thank you so much. And then Miyagi begins to tutor Daniel in bonsai tree care. And they start this relationship. The reason why Daniel sought out Miyagi is he earned the right through empathy. Miyagi saw the plight, the pain that Daniel was in, just like we want to see the plight and the pain that our customers are in. And he took pity on him, and he had empathy, and he demonstrated that empathy. This is often overlooked. We forget, I think, that business is very personal, and it's very human. Marketing, I think, with mass marketing, sometimes we can just kind of craft these messages that kind of go out to the masses, and we forget that there's actually individuals that are struggling, potentially. And they have problems, and they have emotions, and we need to take pity on them. So I just want to ask you to think about this question. Do you take pity on your prospects? Have you walked a mile in their shoes so that you can really have empathy for them? If you haven't, take a look at that. When we demonstrate empathy for our clients and their problems, they open up to us. And it builds trust. Do we need the trust of our prospects? We do. We need it. It's hard to build it. The second thing Miyagi does is he shows his authority. Another scene in the movie, Daniel probably unwisely antagonizes Johnny by pulling a prank on him on Halloween and at a dance, and Daniel's on the run, and Johnny and his gang are after him. And they catch him right as he's about to hop the fence into his apartment complex, and they pull him down, and they just beat the snot out of him. And so much so that he can't even stand, and Johnny's telling one of his compatriots, hey, hold him up so that I can roundhouse kick him to the face. And he's about to send him to the hospital, and over the fence comes Miyagi and has this little scene where he kind of saves the day. Now, this movie's not about Miyagi, and so Miyagi's not the hero of the story. This is actually the low point of the story. This is Daniel's worst moment. He is utterly impotent. Not a good feeling. Miyagi comes in, takes care of business, and demonstrates his authority. He's got the skills to pay the bills, right? He knows how to take care of business in this situation. So we have the solution to our customers' clients. We know that. We can fix all their problems, can't we? But how do we get them to believe that? Here's how Cerasis does it. This is their empathy statement. We understand that freight procurement can be tricky and time-consuming, and you're under a lot of pressure to reduce overall costs and provide data visibility to your leadership. Hey, we get this is hard. This is difficult for you. This is a personal, professional issue, but it's a professional issue for a person, for a human being. At Cerasis, we believe you should be able to source dependable carriers without spending too much time and money, and easily report up to your leaders. This is how they demonstrate empathy to their clients. We know what you're going through. The authority statement. That's why we've helped thousands of shippers with over-the-road transportation management technology and services for over 2 decades. In other words, this is not our first rodeo. We have our black belt in this stuff. We know how to get it done. Now, authority is important, but you notice in Karate Kid, Mr. Miyagi's a really humble guy. He doesn't go around talking about how awesome he is. There is a moment where we see how awesome he is, and everybody's kind of like, whoa, nobody expected that. But he didn't come after Daniel saying, hey, did you see I kicked those guys' butts yesterday? Did you catch a load of that? It was pretty awesome. He doesn't keep doing that throughout the movie. He doesn't congratulate himself. It's really all about Daniel. We do need to do this. We need to be careful that we don't overdo this and take the role of the hero in the story. This is why we have social proof, testimonials, ratings, reviews, marquee logos, of name drop clients. We do want to have that stuff, but we want to do it in measure. So not only do we meet a guide, and the guide shows empathy and authority, but the guide has a plan. All guides have a plan. So Yoda trains Luke in the ways of the Force, right? Mickey trains Rocky by, chasing chickens and tells him no booze, no fooling around. I think there's some raw eggs involved in that. And Haymitch tells Katniss to make friends. Hey, be friendly because you're going to need friends to help you while you're in the games. Mr. Miyagi strikes a deal with the sensei of Cobra Kai. Essentially, he brokers a ceasefire and says, Daniel's going to fight in this tournament, and you're going to have your chance at Daniel. But hey, if you can agree to that, and we'll agree to that, you have to tell your boys to lay off, and we have a ceasefire. And so the sensei agrees to that. So Miyagi begins to train Daniel in some interesting old world techniques, right? What are some of those techniques? Do you remember? Interesting old world techniques. Wax on, wax off. Sand the floor, paint the fence. Anybody want to do a Mr. Miyagi impression? No? No? Okay. Chopsticks, yeah. Miyagi was upset that he couldn't catch a fly, but somehow Daniel got it with beginner's luck. Standing on a boat, apparently, in the water is good for karate, and breathing properly. I mean, he had a secret sauce, right? Miyagi had this technique that he was trying to pass on. He had a plan. And so he trains Daniel using all these techniques until the day of the tournament. What about us? What about us? We're asking our clients to come with us. Trust us. Come with us on this journey. Yes, we've shown empathy. Yes, we have the authority. We've got our black belt in this stuff. But they kind of need to know where we're taking them. And if we can really reduce it down to 3, 4, maybe 5 at the most steps, like we want to demystify and de-fear the process of saying yes. What happens when I say yes to you? Well, here's what's going to happen. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. This is what Ceresis does. Schedule free consultation, number 1. Generate your free shipper cost analysis report, number 2. Receive your shipping efficiency blueprint. Get white glove onboarding and enablement, and regain control of your shipping, save time and save money. We're helping people understand what does it mean for you to take me from here to there, from my pre-transformation state to being transformed, because I'm still kind of scared. De-fear that, demystify that for me. Let's go back to this for a second. If your process is actually like 27 steps, and maybe it is, maybe for your customer to do business with you, it requires a lot of internal meetings to happen and all that. They don't need to have all of that visibility. If you can simplify and consolidate, remember, we're trying to reduce cognitive load. If you give them 19 steps, how many steps in before they give you the face, the brain hurt face? 11 steps doesn't work. So not only do we have a hero who wants something but who has a problem getting it, and a guide who comes along who has a plan, we have a guide who calls our hero to action. Heroes don't move unless they're called to action. They actually are prone to the status quo. Something, either the guide or events and circumstances have to push them out the door. The ring comes to Frodo, right? He has to leave. We have to call our clients to action. We have to tell them what we want them to do. Daniel gets beat up, right? But Mr. Miyagi doesn't let him slink away. He walks right into the dojo, brokers this deal with the villain, and he helps Daniel face his fears head on. He doesn't leave Daniel in that state. Because of his empathy and authority, he's already established that credibility. He's earned the right to do this, and Daniel accepts it. In the same way, prospects who visit our websites or receive our email marketing or any piece of marketing communication, need to be called to do something specific, or they don't know what to do. And when they get on your website, they need to understand exactly what you want them to do in two ways. The first is a direct call to action, a direct call to action. We need to call them to act in a very direct way. This is kind of like the front door of your sales funnel, essentially. Get a demo, start a trial, buy now, schedule a consultation. This button needs to be prominent. It should be in your menu. It should be very clear. It should be everywhere on your site. Really, nowhere on your site should you not be able to find this. But not everybody who lands on your website is ready to say yes to you, right? They're not ready to meet you at the altar right away. So we need a transitional, or probably several transitional calls to action. We need to nurture the relationship. So we can offer a download that gives them a specific, that solves a specific problem they're facing. So download our ebook to learn how to shift from tactical to strategic logistics. That's a valuable piece of content, and it solves a problem that this audience faces. And when they download that, we get their email address. Or calculate their savings with an ROI calculator in exchange for an email address. Or assessments or quizzes. Valuable content, we can grab their email address, and now we can nurture that relationship toward the altar, toward the direct call to action. So what direct and transitional calls to action can you define for your prospects? So this road, this story is leading to one of two places, right? It's leading to either success or to failure. I want to talk about failure first. Sometimes it gets trendy to leave this out. Sometimes people make blanket statements that say you shouldn't sell on fear. And I would agree that you don't want to overdo the fear, uncertainty, and doubt. You don't want to overdo the FUD, okay? Because it can backfire. But you do need to have some failure in your message. And here's why. We don't watch stories. We're not interested in stories unless there are stakes. In fact, the bigger the stakes, the more interesting the story. And the story kind of flirts with us the whole movie. We think the problem's going to get solved, and then something bad happens. We think it's going to get fixed, and then something worse happens. All the way through most of the duration of the movie until the very, very end when it's actually solved. But that keeps us on the edge of our seat. That keeps us listening. Okay? So after all this training, Daniel goes to the karate tournament. And he's doing quite well, to everyone's surprise. And he gets into kind of the late stage brackets of the tournament. And Cobra Kai and the dojo, the sensei of that dojo, are concerned that he's actually going to get to the finals. So John, the sensei, instructs Bobby, one of the more compassionate students, to actually take Daniel out with an illegal move to the knee. Total cheap shot. So he does it. And Daniel ends up essentially in failure. He ends up in failure, if not for some miraculous amount of grit that he's able to muster up in this scene. We have to remind our clients gently that there are stakes. What happens if you do nothing? What happens if you accept the status quo? What happens if you go to a cheaper competitor? What's at stake in your story? For Sally, shipping manager, there's a lot at stake. Her shipping data is fragmented and tracking is a nightmare. By the way, excuse the spelling errors. These are all wireframes and the website's not up yet. But freight arrives poorly packaged or damaged. We're reminding her, hey, Sally, you kind of have these problems still. You're losing customers, vendors, or revenue, and it's too hard and time-consuming to find reliable carriers. Just reminding her a little bit of the pain. Now, you can overdo it, like I said, but you do need to incorporate the failure. We need to gently remind our clients of that possibility. Finally, this is why we're here. We are here to guide our clients to success in their story. That's our job. That's why we exist. And to do this, we have to paint that picture of what that happily ever after looks like. We need to literally demonstrate that on our websites. What's their promised land? What is their happily ever after? So Daniel, even though he's been repeatedly injured, in this climactic scene of the movie, what's he do? Crane kick. Crane technique. Love it. Super emotional part of the movie because all in one moment, Daniel solves all of these problems. He defeats Johnny. He actually earns his respect. Johnny comes over and hands the trophy to Daniel, saying, "You're all right, LaRusso." He gets the girl. Allie comes running over, gives him a big hug. He stops the bully. The world is made right again. And internally now, the picture on the right, what's he feeling? What's his emotional state? What's the payoff? Sorry? Joy? Victory. Internally, now he's a different person. He's a different person. All in a moment, the hero gets what he wants, and all these problems are solved. So for Sally, shipping manager, she wants exception-free shipping, okay? And she wants all of her shipping and reporting problems to go away. That's nirvana for her. And for us that aren't in that business, maybe that sounds a little dramatic or silly, but this is real life for her. Like, this actually causes her some grief. This is heaven for her, and we need to understand what that vision is and paint that picture. What are the happily ever after images that we can paint for our clients? Ask that question within your business and seek to answer it with your marketing. So, Daniel is transformed. In the beginning of the movie, he was afraid, he was ashamed, he was embarrassed. And we felt compassion for him as we watched the movie. Because we know what it's like to feel that, don't we? I mean, imagine if I stood up here and just totally blew it. That would be embarrassing, really embarrassing, because I'm the marketing guy, right? I'm supposed to know how to do this stuff. Like, we know what it's like to be embarrassed. We know what it's like to be ashamed. We know what it's like to be afraid. That's why when we see this movie about somebody else, it's actually telling us our own stories. That's why we care about the story. So he's transformed from the skinny kid with no confidence and a ton of fear to, and frustration and all of those things that we don't want, into somebody who's strong and empowered, and he's confident and he's capable and he's a man. And actually, in the beginning of the movie, he's riding a BMX, and at the end of the movie, he's driving off in this classic car. Okay? For the brands that we help, what's the transformation we usher in for them? If you take one thing away from today, this is what I want you to think about. What's the transformation that you bring about for your client? And this is the thing that your marketing should be talking about without fail, constantly, all the time. So for Vector Legal Method, the transformation they provide for their clients is this. Most in-house attorneys have poor visibility into their cases, and they struggle to control costs. The Vector Litigation Platform provides instant access to comprehensive case information so attorneys can save time and reduce costs. I'm going to give you two more and see if knowing what you know now, you can spot the story. You can spot Act 1, Act 2, Act 3 in the following two. For M.A. Norris, they help their clients transform like this. When it's time for a tenant improvement project, most companies want certainty about the true costs and time required, and they don't want any bad surprises. At M.A. Norris, we leverage decades of knowledge and experience to provide more detailed and accurate estimates so that our clients feel confident that their projects will be completed on time and on budget. In these statements, you have a beginning, a middle, and an end. You have a problem, you have a solution, and you have a reward. You have an Act 1, an Act 2, and an Act 3. For Trinity Lutheran Christian School, this is how they facilitate transformation for the families that come. Every parent wants the best education for their kids, but studies show that children have a hard time learning in large class sizes. Through small class sizes, a custom education plan for each child, and intentional leadership development, a robust performing arts program, and dedicated STEAM content, Trinity Lutheran Christian School provides the best opportunity for your kids to become all that God created them to be. So, again, how do you help your clients transform? You've got to answer that question. So here's the recap. A story is this. It's a hero who wants something, but he's got a problem, or she's got a problem, but they need a guide. And the guide with empathy and authority becomes that guide for them. But the guide has a plan, calling them to action, leading away from failure and into success. That's the story that we need to tell. Don't bore your clients with your company story. Let me say that again. Don't bore your clients with your own company story. Tell them their own story, because that's the one they're interested in. Make it very clear to your prospects how you help them survive and thrive, and do it with minimal cognitive load, and it will help you cut through the noise and increase your odds of surviving and thriving as startups and investors. So you can get your happy ending. Just a bit of implementation here, real quick. How do we do this? That sounds great in theory. What do we do now? Here's two approaches. First approach, the DIY approach. Read this book. You like that? Read the book. We have an endorsement right here up front. Not my book, didn't write it. It's by Donald Miller. I'm giving 3 away today. So I'm going to pass these around, and if you will put your business cards in, you can win one of 3. The second thing that you can do as a DIY approach is go to tellandtrain.com and get the free brand script training. Now, what is a brand script? A brand script essentially maps your company's story to the 7 key ingredients that we just went through. It helps you ask the right questions so you can define all these things in your story. It's the skeleton upon which you're going to build your narrative. And by the way, if you're getting a book, you're also getting a brand script in the book. Write an elevator pitch. When somebody asks you, what do you do? If you're getting this face, you got to work on this. Write a one-liner. I just gave you 3 one-liners of 3 organizations: Vector Legal Method, MA Norris, and Trinity Lutheran Christian School. And finally, story brand everything. Story brand your website, your email marketing, and your collateral. Everything you do, anytime you open your mouth or put pen to paper about your brand, press releases, ads, email copy, web copy, blog copy, slide decks, tell this story. The other option is a guided experience where I walk through this process with you and we actually get the words down on paper. We create a brand script. We create an elevator pitch. We create a one-liner. The benefit of this goes back to something called the curse of knowledge. Does anybody know what the cognitive bias is that's called the curse of knowledge? Anybody heard of that? It's not super well known. You can Wikipedia it. There's an interesting Wikipedia article on it. But essentially what it means is we know a lot about what we're experts in. Our clients do not yet. It's hard for us, because we know what we know, to relate to what our clients know. We make all kinds of assumptions in how we describe what we do that they don't understand. When an outsider comes in, he or she is able to look at that with fresh eyes and ask kind of dumb questions, because we're not you, we're not experts. But ask the questions that your clients are asking so you can get out from the trees and see the whole forest. So that's the curse of knowledge, and that's why consultants exist. We're going to do some Q&A. We have 10 minutes. If you have questions, if you could line up behind the mics on either side of the room, that'd be awesome. Are those buckets still out there? We'll do the drawing at the very end. Buckets are out there somewhere? Someone wouldn't mind bringing them back up, or if they're not going around. Any questions? Strategic questions, story questions, tactical questions? Right here? Yeah, if you do have a question, please get behind one of the mics. Go ahead.
Can you hear?
Yeah.
Yes. Hey, so thank you for that. I'm a business and marketing sort of strategy consultant. So I love what you absolutely, there's a story that has to be told by every brand. What I didn't see you kind of talk about is the strategy behind it. Where do you, I guess, I see people a lot just assuming that marketing is building a website and doing PPC or digital ads, and or building a story. Where does strategy come into that? Where does the really understanding the consumer or customer and building that into your story?
Yeah, so, well, I heard you say 2 things. Understanding your customer is one piece of building your persona and understanding your target audience, and I would say that folds into messaging. You can't just create a cool website with a great message and expect people to come to it. So what we're talking about today is one piece of marketing. Strategy, traffic strategies. So we need to drive people, we need to drive eyeballs to your content, right? And that's a whole nother piece that I haven't even covered today. Things like SEO, pay-per-click, social media marketing, getting your message out there. Really today what we've been talking about is the message itself, the content of that message, and how to have a decision-making criteria for what that message ought to and ought not to be. Does that make sense?
Sort of, but like strategy is not just built through different channels, right? Or your marketing mix. It's built by understanding the research of an industry, understanding
Sure.
trends and that sort of thing. So
Yep. Yeah, so we can't just go into a room and make things up. In other words, we can't just decide, oh, we know certain things about our target audience. We have to have some information about that. We have to have data. If you have customers, one of the best ways of getting that kind of data is interviewing your customers and really understanding these are our best customers. Let's understand all that we can understand about them. Any other questions? Yeah, Anthony.
Hi, Kevin.
Hey.
Thanks for coming out today. This has been really useful. The question I have for you is, so you've done a really great job showing these websites, and what occurs to me is, what if you've got two targets that you're trying to reach? Like, in my particular case, we're trying to reach charities so that we can help the charities reach their donors who are still going to use our site.
Yeah.
So how do you...
Great question. You need to have a specific message to each persona, I think. There certainly is a broad message that can be applicable to everyone, but there's a downside to those messages. I find them to not be as compelling. If you're talking to the whole world, are you talking to me? And so I think there's value in an exercise of identifying a particular target audience or persona, truly understanding what they're after and what problems they have as that persona, and then tailoring a message to that. Audience segmentation is pretty critical to being able to do that. Maybe you've received a cold call or an email from somebody that is completely off the mark. It's the window guy who wants to sell you windows, but you don't own your home. You know, things like that. It's just a disconnect, right? Does that help?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Yes, right here.
I just wanted to just give a thank you and a testimonial because I'm in a startup and we founded it with a very focused idea, and then as you're raising capital and getting bigger, you have to show the expansiveness of it. And then we turned to market, but our vision and our story was still about the expansiveness and who we were. And so we really had to almost go through an entire rebranding, inspired by that book and by what you're presenting today. And it's been incredibly effective. And there's also a little bit of a slap in the face because this is who we were at the very beginning. That's why we came up with the idea. And then you just kind of get lost in the weeds of the big picture. So it's for everybody here, especially founders. It's good to refocus, and this program and this book will help. So thanks a lot.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, if you do have a question, if you could come back to the mic, please. Yes, sir.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for your presentation. My name's DeVergis Jones. I'm a cereal brand marketing guy, Pepsi, General
I'm having
Foods,
trouble hearing
Bristol
you. Would you get a little closer?
I'm a cereal marketing branding guy, Pepsi, General Foods, Bristol Myers, Mars, and Phillips, big mass brands. You talked a lot about trust. Right now, some of the biggest companies in marketing, a la Facebook and Twitter, are merely being questioned relative to trust.
Yes.
The whole concept of fake or perceived real news is under question. What role does that play in the future relative to the way consumers are digesting the information right now?
Do you mean the headlines? What role do the headlines play and current events?
No, just the platforms and their credibility, which I think is under some assault. I mean, some people just don't care, in releasing all their personal information, yada, yada, yada. But I'm wondering where that fits.
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't think the consumer divulging of information is going to stop. I think there'll probably be some regulation. Facebook will get their wrists slapped, some lawsuits. They might have to dial some things back. Their whole monetization model is based on the data. So I don't see that going away for anyone. It might do this a little bit. And the reason why Facebook has all that data on us and wants all that data on us is because they want to target specific messages to us. So when I was talking, I briefly mentioned segmentation. Yeah, you can upload all your data to Facebook, your offline data, and it can tell you where your customers are at and what they're doing. And I heard a conference call this morning from Zuckerberg, and he's very conciliatory and said, yeah, we probably were too trusting. Anybody else hear that conference call? It was on the Daily this morning. We were too trusting early on. We were too naive. We were too idealistic. I don't think that's actually true. I think that's the party line. They knew exactly what they were doing, but we know why they're doing it. Super hyper-targeted, segmented messaging. To Anthony's point, wherever you're sitting, Anthony. Yeah.
Yeah, don't get me started on Zuckerberg, but
okay.
What if the story doesn't have a happy ending? In other words, I'm a founder of a startup company here, and we're building technology for realtors. I'm in the real estate business. And there's a war that's been going on in real estate for about 10 years between Zillow technology and selling online and realtors who don't know how to sell online. And so as technology gets more advanced, right, it replaces people and, well, maybe displaces people. So if you're true about your story, and this is my story, right, building technology that I hope will help realtors, I am a realtor, but if I'm honest, I could build technology to replace realtors or displace them too. So if that is my client, right, if realtors are my client, how can I talk to them in this way? Like, be honest with them.
That's a good question. So we've all heard that line, oh, the bots aren't going to replace jobs, they're going to help people. Right, I'm sure that's true. They are going to help us, but markets shift. Disruption happens. I don't think you can stop it. You may have a proposition problem if you're marketing to an audience a product that will displace them, and if that's your message, or if you don't deal with that objection. One of the things that we couldn't have time to cover today was in the plan phase of all this. We talked about a process plan, but there's also kind of an agreement plan where we make certain promises to our clients about what we won't or will not do. So for instance, CarMax has like their CarMax promise, and you'll get a 127-point inspection, and you have 7 days to bring it back, and there's things that we commit to, but I think the devil's probably in the details. Like there's probably some nuance there for your messaging that I'd be happy to chat with you about, but that's a real struggle for sure. Yeah, Don.
Hi, Kevin. Thanks for the insights you shared with us here today. You had alluded to the fact that there are some risks inherent in characterizing the villain in the story. You didn't really get into that in too much detail, but in my story, the villain is an entity that there's a wide variety of opinion about. Some very much attached to this entity, and others, the U.S. government. Some people feel very strongly about that. Could you unpack that a little bit in terms of what are the risks in treating that entity and villainizing that entity, and how that might be able to be done in a nuanced way?
Yeah, I think that's also in the details, but it may come back to your specific audience. So if you walk into a room of libertarians and you say the government's the enemy, that might be an okay message. It probably won't backfire. If you walk into the NRA and you start talking about how the Second Amendment is awesome and all of those things, then you're going to be okay. So that's why the message really needs to be tailored to the audience. If I walked into a room with a mixed crowd like this and started making all kinds of skewed, biased statements, that wouldn't bode very well for me. So I think it's about knowing who your audience is, kind of what that toleration is. We don't want to be guilty of fear-mongering, and I think that that's the concern with overdoing the villain aspect. We want to be the good guy, I think, and if even as good guys, if we go around just kind of trashing people, those lines start to get a little blurry, you know? I prefer the villain to be kind of this, when I say personification, that doesn't necessarily mean a person. It could be an idea. So for Sally, it's shipping exceptions. If you said shipping exceptions to Sally manager, her eyes start to squint and she starts to kind of, you know, twitch a little bit. And, you know, I imagine her reaction's kind of like Jerry Seinfeld's when Newman comes to the door, you know? But that's not offending any particular person or entity necessarily. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions? We are just at 1 o'clock.
Oh,
Last question.
Quick one, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm Brian. I'm from a recycling company called Bottle Rocket. So we run on a SaaS kind of similar based model with recurring revenue. I'm just curious, besides telling the story, we have a recycling company called Bottle Rocket. So we run on a recurring revenue based model. So besides kind of telling the first story to get the customer hooked, what ways can you use and implement storytelling in engaging them for retention?
It's just all about messaging. So whatever channels you might be using, whether that's email marketing, I don't know, maybe they're on a Slack group, whatever channel you happen to be engaging them on, that message can always tie back to their story. It's just really a way of thinking and understanding that pretty much everything that comes out of our mouth has to tie back to surviving and thriving for them. How do we get them to that transformation? So I realize that's kind of a general answer, but maybe we could talk about some details. It's probably a longer answer than I can give right now. Yeah. Hey, I want to thank you so much. You guys ready to do this drawing? Yeah. Okay. Any more cards? Any more cards?